had a stimulus tax cut, and that was like $150 billion when he gave a tax cut to everybody. And people were talking about, well, that's kind of expensive, $150 billion. Are you sure we can afford that? And now, the Obama stimulus was $787 billion, and that was on top of the $700 billion TARP and so on. So, I mean, these numbers just got so big, they desensitized us. But I think, to answer your question, people are starting to realize, in the longer, right now, people love Obama. Not the people in my circles, but, most people. So I think he has this grace period, but, after a year goes by, he can't keep blaming everything on the Bush administration. So I think at some point people are going to wake up, but I think it's going to take a while.
Murphy, our debt to GDP here is somewhere around 45% because you don't have the contingent liabilities factored into the GFS deficit and all that. But with the U.S. debt where it is, people used to be concerned about the Russians taking over. Then they were concerned about the Japanese buying everything. A friend was telling me today that if his calculations are correct, the U.S. debt load, that every citizen of the world will be in debt $128,000 with just the U.S. debt load alone. That's a staggering number.
Yes, it is. So just to repeat that for the people in the back, he's saying, and I don't know that figure, but it sounds plausible, that if you factor in everything, so like the figures I was talking about, saying like the U.S. federal debt will go to 80% of U.S. GDP by 2019 with these figures, but that just refers to explicit government obligations like U.S. treasuries and things like that. But when you start figuring in all the benefits they've promised to Social Security recipients and Medicare and Medicaid and all these things, the numbers get astronomical. Was it 120, did you say?
120.
He was saying that right now the actuarial tables and so forth, that the U.S. government's outstanding obligations, their total debt, works out to about $120,000 per person on Earth, not just in the U.S. So, part of the answer to that is I'm not getting my Social Security checks. That's just not going to happen, right? So, you can scratch that up. You don't have to work to pay me my Social Security because I think they're going to eliminate it. Or more realistically, what will happen is the price inflation will rise and they won't increase the benefits that much. So in real terms, I'll be getting a pittance, but technically it'll satisfy the contract.
Dick, then Jeff.
Our government debt in the Bahamas is unquestionably rising to what many people regard as unsupportable level. Up. Now this debt is being incurred largely a result of economic stimulus programs the government is putting into effect various ways. Now, to many members of the Nassau Institute, economic stimulus by government is absolutely anathema. On the other hand, without some degree of stimulus, there could be serious deflationary aspects in our economy, or for that matter, in the American economy. In your view, what is the greatest danger? Is it a greater danger in the long term to build up a huge amount of debt, hoping that the economy will turn around and resolve the issue? Or is it the greatest danger to restrict the economic stimulus and just face the risk of serious deflationary and indeed social dislocation?
Okay, so the question is, what's the bigger threat? That pumping in all this money from stimulus pumps things up, and that's bad because it raises debts. But on the other hand, if you just sat back and did nothing, would there be deflation? Doesn't that have bad consequences? So that's something I do deal with fairly thoroughly in the Depression book. I think it's largely a myth that deflation is this boogeyman, that it's a bad thing. That I show in the book that, for example, in several large stretches of U.S. history before the Federal Reserve, you had falling prices. You also have it now in the computer industry, that in terms of, the actual price of a laptop might go up year to year, but that's because it's, the features keep getting better. In terms of how much do you pay for a given megabyte of RAM or something like that, those prices keep falling in certain industries, and that obviously doesn't mean the computer industry is stagnant, or that everyone's afraid to buy a computer because they're going to wait for prices to fall. So I think that it's largely not true that falling prices per se is a bad thing. And in fact, again, I won't go into the episodes, but there's you had greater deflation during the 1920-21 depression than you did during the Great Depression, and the reason it was so bad in the Great Depression was, again, because Hoover came in and tried to freeze wage rates. So if the government really did sit back and do nothing, it's true, a lot of prices would have fallen severely, but wages also would have fallen. So, people who had saved and were on fixed incomes, they would have gotten wealthier, and you would have had, the system would have gotten flushed out a lot more quickly. So there would have been a painful adjustment period, but I think we would have been over it by now. Whereas by trying to reflate this bubble, you're just frozen in this state for as long as they're going to keep pumping money in.
Yep.
What is quite curious, when you look at the crash in 1929, 14 months later, the market had recovered 50%. And then all of a sudden, December 10, 1930, the collapse of the third largest bank in New York, the Bank of the United States. And from that time onward, the economic system of the United States totally failed. With the change of government, and the government literally becoming the basis of employment, production, and distribution in the United States. This is exactly what's happening today. We've had this wonderful market recovery. Everyone's excited about it. The recession, the depression, it's over. But what is going to be the turning point? What is going to be that December 10 event that happened? The collapse of the Bank of the United States in New York.
Okay, so just to repeat the question, he said that after the 29 crash, the market fell severely and then actually recovered about 50% through the following year, but then it was December 10th, is that the...
December the 11th was Monday. But
okay.
The 10th is when they, in effect, were not able to open the doors. And
right.
It was in the Bronx, you remember, it was about 2 miles. The people lined up to get their deposits. And it was about 2 weeks before that, manufacturers Hanover, 3 other banks were going to merge. They were not able to merge because the Fed stepped in and would not put the necessary guarantees forth to save that bank. In other words, the Fed had caused this depression, which became the Great Depression. I mean, I'm just offering that within the context of your thinking.
Right. So the Bank of the United States failed the following December 1930, and that's what triggered all these bank runs and bank panics. And so the idea was, in the mid-1930s, or 1930, people thought things were fine, and that's ironic because we're sort of in that lull right now that a lot of people are talking about. Are there green shoots? Is the economy recovering and so forth? Has the market finally hit bottom? And I don't think that it has. And again, that's why I went through all the laundry list of things that the Obama administration, again, following the heels of the Bush administration, is doing. That if you believe in the free market and think that socialism doesn't work, then you can't possibly think that okay, now we've settled down, things will be fine from this point on, because they just socialize so much of the U.S. economy. So, and then the specific question was, what's going to be the trigger to cause the market downturn and to wreck the economy? Well, if I did know that, I wouldn't tell you guys, because that would ruin my own investments. But no, I don't know specifically what it is. My worry, what I think is going to, so first of all, there's plenty of banks right now that are still insolvent, despite what the government. The only reason a lot of these banks
80%?
Are still in business is because on their books they have mortgage-backed securities and things like that are their prices being propped up artificially by the Fed's purchase programs. So if the Fed ever stopped that, they would instantly be on paper insolvent again. So you could have that issue. So if the housing market continues, right now it's pumped up a little bit, but I think it could continue to deteriorate, could drop at any moment. Or if some central banker around the world just says the wrong thing, like there could be a mistranslation of what he said, and it could be he's saying we're entertaining the idea of a few months down the road maybe switching out of dollars, and they say tomorrow we're selling dollars. That right there could cause something. So it's, again, I think the bubble right now, the big bubble is in U.S. Treasury. So I check my internet every day when I get up just to see, did something major happen around the world to cause interest rates to rise in the U.S.
Let's take one more. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm just Michael. Obviously, there's a little bit of conflict in theory here. I mean, we'll agree that there's a lot of printing, there's a lot of treasuries that are going to monetize this debt eventually, because Russia and China are going against the treasury standard, more towards the gold standard, or different forms of holding the reserves. Now, what do you see as maybe a triggering event for the velocity of money to increase.